Welcome. My name is Schyler Church. I am a California real estate broker as well as a member of the education department at Accredited Real Estate Schools. We offer the courses as well as exam preparation to obtain a license as well as maintain your license. So this video today is going to discuss the actual state exam. So once you've done the requirements, you've been approved and you're ready to go take that state test with the Department of Real Estate, if you're going for your broker's license, because remember, there are two different license types in California. There's the broker and then there's also the salesperson. Most everyone has to go for their salesperson license, but if you qualify with the 2 years of full-time experience within the preceding 5 years or a 4-year degree with a major or minor in real estate, as well as completing the 8 courses, you can then go for your broker's license. So once you've already done all these requirements and you're good to go, let's actually talk about the state exam and what it's like and what you'll be dealing with. So the state exam is 200 multiple choice question for brokers, and it is an electronic format, so it's going to be on the computer at one of their locations, heavily regulated, and you have 4 hours to complete this exam. So then just know you can do it at one of their 5 locations, so Sacramento, Oakland, Fresno, Los Angeles, or San Diego. If you are not in one of those areas, you need to travel to one of these areas to actually take the state exam because they only offer it at these 5 locations. Important to know about that. But the most important thing to know about the state exam is good old California is where, yes, it's 200 multiple choice questions, but it's not just a straight across 75% that you need to pass. So you would think you would only need to correctly answer 150 questions out of 200 to pass the state exam. That is not correct. You need to get a weighted 75% to pass. That means the questions are weighted differently, and how these 7 areas are constructed to make the state test also comes into play for how it's weighted. And so we'll go over this a little bit more. So you could answer over 150 questions correctly, but if you miss the heavy hitting questions, you might not pass the state test. So we'll go through this a little bit more. So due to this being on the computer at their location, the results are immediate. This is a huge plus. So that way, when you submit the exam, you're going to return your mouse, the information, the material provided by the state, and they'll give you a piece of paper. And this piece of paper, they'll have you go outside the building and you can open it and it'll give you your results. So the exam is qualifying in nature. So if you pass, they'll say, congratulations, you passed the state exam. And so whether you'll either get your license that day if you submitted the combination application, or if you haven't submitted the license portion of it, you'll need to do so then you can actually start practicing. So that's great, you're good, and you're able to then move on to the actual license portion of it. However, even if you do pass, you won't get your score. However, if you do not pass, of course that this is going to be a bummer, but it's not the end of the world because you're allowed to go online, schedule and retake that state exam at their soonest availability. You just have to pay the exam fee, which for brokers is $95. So it's not the end of the world. Of course, it's going to be a bummer because you've put all this effort into studying and you don't want to have to go back and take this exam and also have to keep studying. But it's not that hard. You don't have to wait 6 months, for instance, to go retake it. You can, as soon as they have an availability, you can go retake the exam. You just have to pay the fees. Also, because if you do not pass the exam, the department's actually pretty good about this because what they do is they'll give you a breakdown. So on that piece of paper that they provide, it'll say, hey, if you didn't pass, but let's say overall you got a 67%. You remember you need a 75 for the broker's exam. Well, that'll just say overall you got about a 67% with how the exam is weighted and constructed. But they're also going to provide a breakdown from all 7 of the areas to say how many questions, not the number of questions, but the percentage of questions that you did answer correctly in each of these subject areas. So it gives you an idea of how actually proficient you are in the concepts and in the areas. And the thing to know about it, because it's weighted, even though let's say one of the areas you might have gotten 50% on it, you answered half of the questions correctly, half of them incorrectly. You still, that might not be that big of a deal if the area is maybe only worth 9%. So that's something you have to take into consideration, but truthfully, you don't know how it's really going to be constructed. So you have to be proficient in all 7 areas, especially because the overall score, so that score they give you, that 67%, for instance, cannot be obtained by just averaging the percentage in these 7 areas. So let's go through this a little bit more. So the 7 areas that the state exam have, they have area 1, where it's property ownership and land use controls and regulations. They say this is going to be weighted at about 15% of the exam. Whether it's actually 15%, you don't know. This is just an approximation that the department has released saying it averages about 15%. And then area 2, agency. This is about 17%. Area 3, which is basically appraisal, it's about 14%. Area 4 is financing, about 9%. Area 5, transfer of property, 8%. Area 6, practice of real estate and disclosures. This is like a catch-all category, and it's a huge category, so it's 25% approximately. And then Area 7, contracts, and they say it's about 12%. Now, so for instance, when I was telling you, maybe you got 67% overall, that might have been you got 67% based on how you answered the questions, how the questions were weighted. But one of the areas may have been 50%. So let's say financing, you got 50% on it. Well, let's say there were only 10 questions and it only weighted to about maybe, let's say 10% of the exam. Well, if that was the case, or maybe it was even 7% of the exam, then, you might have missed 5 questions if there were 10 questions in it. But if it was weighted at 5%, it would have only been 2.5%. But you don't know, and that's why you have to be proficient in all 7 areas. But the good news is, because they do give you this breakdown if you don't pass, it gives you an idea of really what you need to focus on doing better. So for instance, a lot of people do well in areas 1, 2, 6, and 7. A lot of times because these are a little bit easier for students to understand and grasp and apply to questions, whereas appraisal, financing, and transfer of property can get relatively convoluted, and there's a lot of intricacies to it, and you haven't really come across this stuff before a lot of times. So usually those are going to be the areas that students have lower scores in, but this will give you an idea when actually, if you didn't pass, of saying, hey, I didn't do well in appraisal, and this is about 14% of the exam. I really need to up my score here. Or maybe I was only about 65% in agency. I need to really up my score there to make sure I'm better at it, so that way I'll be able to pass the exam if it's at 17% and you didn't answer a lot of the questions right, because that can be weighted a lot. So this gives you a really good starting point. I wish there was a clear-cut answer, but there's not. It's just you have to have the right material, put the time into studying to make sure you're proficient in the material. But this way it gives you an idea of truthfully where you need to put more emphasis on and where your strengths and your weaknesses are. So just know these are the approximations of what the DRE has released. Every exam is different, as well as the version that you get and everything, because it's on the computer. They're able to come up with stuff on a whim. So these are the 7 areas. Make sure you're proficient in all 7 of the areas. Truthfully, if you can be scoring at least over 80% in all of these 7 areas, that'll be a really good sign that you're prepared for the state test. If you're not doing well in certain areas, then you need to spend more time before taking that state test. Also remember, and because we've talked about these 7 areas, the state exam is based on theory of law, so theory of real estate. It's not based on actually, a lot of it is going to be helpful when you're in the real world, but this is going to be based on theory of what the DRE and what the law states, what you should be doing and what could be. So for instance, this is the best example I can give. They'll say if you have an oral listing, you are going to be entitled to a commission. However, proving it in the courts is a lot harder if you don't have anything in writing. But for state exam purposes, theoretically, you're entitled to a commission, even if it was based off of an oral agreement. Whereas to actually prove it in the courts, usually you want it written. So this is a prime example of being able to make sure to do the differentiation between real world, what's realistically probably going to happen versus what the law states should happen, is where you need to make sure to keep it in mind, especially when going for your broker's license. A lot of times you have the experience, and so you're going to have a lot of habits, you can say, and a lot of experience, which is great for actually practicing and making money. But for the state exam, they try to trick you up because the state exam is not logical. It's based on what the law states, and you're not usually reading this on a day-to-day basis. So sometimes you try to put logic of what you think would actually be happening in the real world, and that's not what the state is trying to ask about the question. And so that's where you have to make this differentiation and prepare. You can be great in real estate, but that doesn't mean you're going to be prepared for the state exam without studying, because there's so much material to cover. And especially what you're doing is just a snippet usually of everything that the state exam covers, because the state exam is all encompassing and you might be only practicing in one tiny little sector of real estate. So make sure to keep that in mind. But if you did pass, remember, you will receive your license, given that if you submitted the combination application for the license and the exam, so it was all paid for up front, you'll have your license that day. If, however, you only did the exam only application, you're going to then need to submit the license application with the remaining fees, as well as your fingerprinting. And if you need more information regarding the application and the forms and the process of this, make sure to check out our How to Apply video. But otherwise, this is just a video for general information. I am not affiliated with the Department of Real Estate. I am not a member of the Department of Real Estate. So we do not cover all stipulations. This is just general information. So as always, please refer to the DRE for up-to-date and accurate information. I have their information over here posted. But you can always contact Accredited for general questions, and we'd be very happy to answer anything you may have. We thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you licensed as a real estate broker soon.